Hi everyone, my name's Chloe Goldbach, and I wanted to thank all of y'all so much for coming today. A little bit about myself and why I'm here. I'm a lesbian-identified transgender woman, former biomedical engineer, and I'm in the process of pursuing a PhD in counseling psychology with focuses on the trans community and the rest of the LGBT community. Today, I'm reaching out to ask your help in supporting LGBTQ+ youth. As a guardian ad litem, it is important to have the best interests of the child in mind. And for a child who is part of the LGBTQ+ community, supporting and affirming their identity is the best way to support them, their needs, and their interests. Helping them flourish to be their true selves instead of someone society says they should be is what's really most important and the best way to not only support them, but affirm them in being who they are in this world. So before I get into a little more about my story and what you can do to support LGBTQ+ youth, I thought it would be helpful to just give a quick primer on some LGBTQ terms, so everyone here is on the same page in terms of what I'm talking about. First off, it's important to distinguish gender identity and sexual orientation. Gender identity is who you identify as in terms of your gender, and whether you identify as a woman, a man, or somewhere outside the male-female binary. And someone who is transgender is someone whose gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth. So to make that more clear, someone like me would be transgender. My sex assigned at birth, the sex that the doctor said I was male. But it turns out that I'm actually female. Therefore, my female identity is not the same as my male sex assigned at birth, and therefore I identify as a transgender woman. And this opposite would be true for somebody who identifies as a transgender male. There's also the term cisgender, which is the opposite of trans, where somebody does identify with their sex assigned at birth. So like my example before, this could be someone who was assigned male at birth, but also identifies as male, and therefore they would be a cisgender male. So gender identity is who you are in terms of your gender, unlike sexual orientation, which is who you're attracted to in terms of their gender. And this could be somebody who is heterosexual, that would be, men attracted to women, women attracted to men. Somebody who is lesbian, women attracted to women. Somebody who is gay, which is kind of interchangeable, but typically used for men attracted to men, but it could also be used for women attracted to women. Somebody who's bisexual in terms of being attracted to more than one gender. And then there's also the sort of umbrella term known as queer, which is a term that is an umbrella way of saying that you are not heterosexual, that you are not straight. And exactly what queer means depends on the individual person. For some people, queer could mean being lesbian, it could mean being bi. There's a variety of meanings. It's important to note that trans people, just like cis people, can be queer or heterosexual, since gender identity and sexual orientation are separate from one another. There are many more terms out there in terms of the LGBTQ+ community, but those are some of the most basic ones, and I think it's good to have at least brief understanding of the LGBTQ+ community in terms of the terminology, because this will help you to best support your child if they are part of the LGBTQ+ community. So before I get into, again, ways that you can be supportive, I want to go into a little detail on my story and how this ties into why supporting LGBTQ individuals, especially LGBTQ youth, is something that's so very important to me. Going back to my childhood, I had frequent struggles with coming out, in terms of struggling with coming to terms with who I was. It was kind of that classic story of, I knew I was different. I had these feelings going back to the age of 3 or 4 where I knew I wanted to be a girl. I knew I wanted to wake up as a girl. I can't tell you how many times I wished going to bed at night that I'd wake up in the morning as a girl. And there wasn't some magic wand to wave around to just magically change my gender and my body to make all things match. Make what is in my head match with what I see with the rest of my body, which wasn't as big of a deal until I started going through puberty. But even before then, as a child, I didn't have any positive role models. I didn't have anyone that I felt I could reach out to, share what I felt with. The only things that I would see were, things like reality TV shows or daytime talk shows where trans people, and often queer people as well, were just the butt of jokes. So messages like that get internalized, especially when you're a child. And they tell you, you're different, so it's okay for society to make fun of you. Which, in another way, it tells you it's not okay to be yourself and be taken seriously. It's not okay to be yourself. It's unsafe to be yourself. These are all the kinds of messages that we as queer and trans people get throughout our lives. And these messages get internalized and reinforced when we don't have people in our lives that are providing a safe space for us to express ourselves, which is why it's so important for people like you to provide that space at a young age so people can express themselves in a way that they will be accepted, supported, and affirmed, and not made fun of or bullied or discriminated against. But I didn't have this as a child. Throughout elementary school, throughout middle school, especially as when I was starting to go through puberty and experiencing more physical changes, I started to feel more distant, more isolated, even like a freak at times. And as you can imagine, that's not a fun feeling to have. It's not something that I would wish upon anyone to experience. And with these increasing feelings of isolation came increasing feelings of depression and increasing feelings of suicide and suicidal ideation. Here, I think it's important to note some statistics on suicide, especially for youth and LGBTQ youth. So from the ages of 10 to 24, suicide is the second leading cause of death. But even more shocking than that, youth that are part of the LGBTQ plus community are 3 times more likely than cisgender, heterosexual youth to contemplate suicide, and 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. On top of that, about 40% or more of transgender adults have attempted suicide. And over 90% of those transgender adults state that they attempted suicide at least once before reaching the age of 25. Probably when they were a teenager. And then LGBTQ youth who experience family rejection are over 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than youth that are accepted by their families when they come out. From these statistics, I think we can all see that not being supportive of LGBTQ plus youth leads to things like increased rates of lower self-esteem, lower self-worth, lower self-confidence, which then leads to increased rates of self-harm and increased rates of suicide attempts and therefore completed suicides. These are kids. For many of these kids, when they come out to someone, that could be the first time they're coming out to anyone. And they therefore don't have any life experience to tell them that, okay, these people might not support me, but there are other people in my life that do. And if they continually get rejection, they internalize that and tell them that it's okay to be rejected. They tell themselves that it's okay for society to reject me. It's okay for the people in my life to not love me because there's something wrong with me. At the end of the day, not supporting LGBT youth just leads to higher rates of discrimination, self-hate, self-harm, suicide, and so on. All these things that we should not be subjecting our youth to. So instead, why don't we take the alternate route of supporting and affirming and loving? Even if we don't fully understand their identity, it's important to understand that they know who they are and that we should support them in expressing who they are. So once I came out and started to figure out who I was in terms of my gender and my sexual orientation, in terms of being a lesbian transgender woman, this opened up my world to start exploring what I wanted out in the rest of the world. I had started to figure out who I was, but now I could start figuring out what I wanted from the world around me, where my passions lied. That allowed me to start figuring out things like, oh, I don't like engineering. I need something that's more personally satisfying where I can help people, which is why I'm now on a journey to start a PhD program next month in counseling psychology to eventually be a therapist or educator, some type of role where I can help transgender individuals, help them in finding the resources they need to be themselves, providing them the support to come out to themselves, come to terms with who they are, and then share that with the world around them in a way that fulfills their life more than they've ever been fulfilled before. And I think that's the case for everyone, trans, queer, or not. Being able to be yourself allows you to really figure out the rest of your life. It allows you to figure out what's important to you, where your passions lie, and it allows you to be a happier, more successful, more passionate, more driven individual. I think it's safe to say we want that for everyone in our lives. We want that for ourselves, but we especially want that for the upcoming generations, for the youth in the world. We don't want them to be beaten down and demoralized before they even get a chance to see how beautiful life can be when you are yourself. So, when we support LGBTQ youth, when you support LGBTQ youth, you're allowing them to be their authentic selves at a younger age. You're allowing them to experience powerful things like high positive self-esteem, self-love, self-worth, high levels of confidence at a younger age that they can then take into their lives at a younger age to start living their lives at a younger age. I think we'd all agree, again, that this is something that we would want not only for ourselves, but for all the kids out in the world too. I've touched on this quite a bit throughout, but you might still be asking, what can you do to help? Like I said, the best way is to support, affirm, and love your child for who they are and how they identify. But what does this look like? There are a variety of ways that this might look. And this is just a few suggestions. This is by no means an exhaustive list. First and foremost, respect their identity and don't invalidate their identity in any way. Trust the child that they know who they are. Even if they're still figuring things out, they know themselves better than anyone else in this world. It's also important to just show interest in their identity. Ask questions about their identity. Make them feel loved, make them feel supported, make them feel like you care about who they are. But at the same time, realize and show that this is only one part of their identity. Don't tokenize them. Don't be like, oh, this kid's trans, so they're nothing but trans, or this kid's gay, so they're nothing but gay. Realize that that is one part of their identity. It may be very important to them. It may be a very small part of their life. Whatever it is to them, that is what it is to them, so respect that. But also realize at the end of the day, they're kids, they're in school, they have aspirations, they might want to study this or that in school, and many of these things might have nothing to do with their queer or trans identity, which is fine. Many of the things might have to do with their queer or trans identity depending on the kid. That's also fine. But it's just important to realize that there's so many other parts that make up a person beyond their sexual orientation and their gender identity. It's also important to be very proactive in learning about the LGBTQ plus community. You're going to learn from your child, but don't have that child be the only source of learning on things on the LGBT community. It's not the responsibility of somebody in the LGBTQ plus community to educate people who are not in the community. Some people will take it upon themselves to educate people in the community. That's something I'm very passionate about. But not everyone wants to do that, and I don't even want to do that all the time, because like I said, we are people, and our trans and queer identities are just parts of who we are. They are not the entirety of who we are. So take a moment to ask other people in the community, but even more so, take a moment to read books, take a moment to do Google searches, take a moment to read scholarly articles, do some research and learn. I think it would be much more powerful to ask somebody like, oh, what do you think about this article I read? As opposed to like, what is trans? So since we do want to support the best interests of our child and we do want to support who they are, obviously you should be stepping in to support them if there are situations where they will be discriminated against, bullied, anything like that. I can guarantee that that will happen at least once. If they are queer or trans identified, it's going to happen. So it's important to step in and support them and show that they're loved and affirmed, but also show them that any sort of discriminatory language, hate speech, physical violence, bullying, that's not acceptable. Show them that. Be a good role model for them and also support them at the same time. And on the topic of role models, if you yourself are not queer or trans, connect them with positive role models that share the identities that they have. And I highly encourage you to connect with them with people that they can actually meet locally. And if you can't find anyone, connect them with resources, connect them with YouTubers, connect them with authors, artists, actors, people that they can read about, read their stories online, read their stories in a book. So that way they can realize that they're not alone. And not only are they not alone, but there are people out there just like them that are thriving in this world. And that means the world to these kids. That meant the world to me to find out that there are other people out there just like me, and they're more than okay. They are excelling, exceeding expectations, and living their lives to the fullest. And on top of role models, identify some safe spaces in the community where these kids can go and be themselves without any fear of harm or discrimination. Places like the local Pride Community Center, or Gainesville Equality Youth, or Alachua Tranquility. Places where they can be surrounded by people who are queer and or trans and feel safe being themselves to these people. Places that are confidential, places that respect them for who they are. Lastly, I think one thing that doesn't even necessarily involve the LGBTQ youth directly is to have open dialogues with the people around you in your life, to spread awareness and support for the LGBTQ plus community. Open up these dialogues, help normalize these dialogues, help spread that culture of love and support throughout our community and beyond. So again, I wanted to thank everyone here for coming today. If you didn't realize it already, I hope you now realize that queer and trans youth are just as deserving of your love, support, affirmation as much as anyone else in this world. Thank you.